We'll give everybody a couple minutes to jump on and join. While we wait, remind me where you're located, Jethro and Omar. You're in New York, New Jersey.
I am now in lovely New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay. Jethro, where are you?
I am smack dab in the middle of Los Angeles.
Oh.
For those in the area that you're aware, more on the Miracle Mile end. So that's right where I'm at. Been here since 2019 and originally from the East Coast, but I've kind of hopped around between coasts over the last couple years, or more than a decade now. But I've settled. We've settled my wife here in LA.
Yeah, nice. Well, the weather is always beautiful in LA, so
it's gonna be 75 today. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, that's nice. We're in Tennessee right now. We're actually moving to New York though in a couple of months. And this morning, my husband and I were talking because it's warmer in New York today than it is in Tennessee, and we were like, "What is going on? Like, we got to go. It's cold here."
Yeah.
But cool. All right. Well, we can go ahead and get started. And then as others kind of trickle in, the recording will be available after this. Before we jump in, just a couple of like housekeeping things. There is a chat. We like to keep this really conversational for those of you who are joining us. As we kind of go through this panel, if you guys want to drop your questions into the chat, then we will answer them there. And we'll take the questions as they come. So feel free to jump in. I'm going to go ahead and let Omar and Jethro introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do and their background. And then Omar, I'll let you kind of take a little bit of a high level overview of data warehousing at Rockerbox, and then we'll jump into the panel questions.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. So, yep, as Ashley said, my name is Omar. I'm a product manager at Rockerbox. I've been here, about 3 years now. Crazy how quickly that goes, or almost, 3.5 years. And I work primarily on our data warehousing offering, but I also kind of cover all things sort of like our core foundational data, which does kind of lend itself to warehousing. So happy to dig more in here and answer any questions that you guys have. Definitely feel free to throw questions early and often in the chat.
I'm Jethro Perez. I'm currently freelancing right now, but I've spent pretty much the last 14 years of my career in analytics. 10 of those, about 11 of those 14 years have been centered around marketing to some extent, helping businesses leverage growth by understanding customer journeys. Here to help answer any questions from past experiences.
Awesome. And he buried the lead a little bit, but Jethro has also been a customer of Rockerbox over the past couple of years, and has a lot of experience leveraging Rockerbox and kind of the data that comes out of it. And he's been really influential as a part of our customer advisory board too. So we're really happy to have him with us today. Awesome. Well, Omar, do you want to kind of walk us through just a high level overview to kind of set the foundation?
Yeah. So let's talk about sort of the Rockerbox warehousing integrations. So with Rockerbox warehousing, you get access to granular, accurate, both user level and aggregate marketing data that's interoperable with your stack. We're going to ship that data directly into your warehouse, where you can do basically whatever you want with it. You are getting kind of the keys to the castle. So we integrate with Snowflake, AWS Redshift, and BigQuery. And we are constantly evaluating, other integrations out there. So, while this is the list right now, doesn't mean that it's going to be the list forever. So some of the, benefits of warehousing, you're going to get, again, access to that raw data, as we process it in Rockerbox. So that's going to cover, first party marketing data. So that's going to be your user level path to conversion data. So you can evaluate, for each user level conversion, all of the marketing interactions that they had. You'll also get aggregated performance and spend reporting that's consolidated across all of the platforms and channels that you run. And so that kind of covers the marketing data. A new data set that we've rolled out that we kind of dub our clickstream data set is that log level data set of all of the on-site events. And with that, you can do like traffic analysis, understand which channels are driving users to site, and leading to like engaged sessions versus maybe just like a landing page and then bouncing. Just a ton of value that you can unlock there. And then the last being ad platform data, right? So these are your big, your Google, your Meta, TikTok, Pinterest, right? We're taking all of that aggregated spend and conversion and performance metrics that are coming from platform and centralizing and standardizing it into like a one kind of standard reporting taxonomy, taking away all of that data engineering lift from your data teams. And it's because we're shipping that data to your warehouse, it's an always on sync, it's continuously available. You don't have to do any file staging or updating. You just hit the tables and access your latest and greatest data. Flip to the next slide. And, I really covered this, but, what we're doing here is we're taking the lift off of your engineering team, off of your data engineering. You're still going to need, an analytics function to interact with the data. Most marketing organizations are not going to have technical ability to kind of work with that data autonomously, but it's like a drastic amount of work that we're taking away from having to unify data across all of these different fragmented systems, standardize it, and unify it into consolidated reporting.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Omar. Okay, so I promise that's the last of like the Rockerbox selling. We're going to get into the panel questions and really jump into like how are businesses thinking about data warehousing and what should they be doing and how should they be approaching it. So the first question that we have, and Jethro, I'm going to throw this one to you first to give Omar a little bit of a break. What are some of the biggest challenges that companies face when they're integrating this marketing data into their warehouse?
Of course. Yeah. So it really depends on what stage you're at as a company. So if you're an earlier stage company or later stage company, what the kind of evolution and role of analytics is in your organization, which I'll kind of get into later because from research I've found there's kind of 4 distinct segments of that. But if you're kind of in that earlier stage, you really have to understand what your primary needs are. And even if you are actually even a later stage company, what I try to tell people is your stakeholders are your customers, right? So think like a product manager in some cases, or adopt some of the frameworks that product managers use in understanding the need and value of what you're trying to produce. I think really, and you can say this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even 15 or 20 years ago, it is easier today to extract, deploy, analyze, transform data than it ever was before. And I will probably talk about this a couple of times, but with the rise of LLMs, I think it allows you, with proper supervision, to really speed up this process of raw data into your warehouse to transformed and actionable insights, whether it's in a dashboard or whatever form of reporting that your organization uses. The one thing that this does bring is the challenge is that we have, to be honest, a lot of data. We almost have too much data. I think data today is cheaper than, like I said, it ever was to store and transform. And what that does is, it kind of creates a forest where marketers, product managers, everyone kind of lose themselves within this vast array of information. And so the challenge really for data teams is to understand your core needs of your stakeholders and kind of really see the forest. Yeah, what is this saying? You want to see the forest for the trees. And so understanding what those what the important things are in that data. I think that's kind of the bigger hurdle. So really starting simple and not taking a 0 to 1 approach where you kind of build this humongous infrastructure or, amusement park of data. I've made that, what I would say, mistake a couple times in my past. If you build it, they may not necessarily come because it's not that they don't want to, but they just don't understand the value of the work behind it. So that's kind of that's what I would tell strategists and analytics teams. If you struggle, kind of start simple and monitor.
No, that's a great call out. And I think, the influx of ETLs is a great point, but also like when you're integrating all of this marketing data from not only like so many different platforms, like what we've heard from customers is like you're integrating often like you're measuring these different platforms in multiple different ways via multiple different methodologies. And a lot of the time via multiple different like third-party organizations, they're all delivering the data differently. And then like you don't have common taxonomy, like you're left with like a question mark. And Omar, I'm sure you can speak more to that than I can. So I'll pass the question over to you.
Yeah, totally. And I think we're going to see some of the themes kind of repeat across questions. So I won't go into maybe some of the detail again to later, but this is an interesting question because I think you read this and you say, oh, it's going to be a very technical answer. And it could be, but I think even, starting from the basics, it's more of, and building on what Jethro said, really like an existential and also an organizational question, where it's like, hey, do we have organizational alignment on how we're going to take this data and use it? And are we going to use it with consistency across the organization? As much as it is, well, okay, we have, this wealth of data. What do we actually want to do with it? What do we want to know? What are the KPIs, right? And I think, speaking on the former, getting that organizational buy-in, we found has been incredibly important, especially just for Rockerbox customers, especially as we think about, we're often, thinking about, we're serving like multiple different customers, right? Like we have marketers, right, that are interacting with our UI, that are interacting with, dashboards, some sort of BI layer, right, that like Jethro and data teams are building out. But then we also have like analytic customers, data engineer customers that are, interacting directly with our data. And we actually do have customers that like only, leverage warehousing. And without buy-in across both, your analytics and your marketing teams, it's just not going to get off the ground. And we've actually found that like the most successful implementations of like, Rockerbox marketing data integrated with the rest of your warehouse is when the data team is involved as early in, in the process as possible, sometimes even before like signing the contract. Getting that buy-in, getting that mutual understanding of, hey, we're going to take this data and integrate it. And it's even more important if like Rockerbox is coming in and like replacing an existing sort of like marketing solution, whether that's something from another like measurement provider or just something that was built in-house, right? Like you have teams that are locked into an understanding of their channel and a particular measurement methodology. And as those numbers change, right, you need to have just a clear understanding of like, what's that new methodology? Why is it beneficial? Why do we believe that this should be used as like the source of truth for our organization, and have that kind of be disseminated across the teams so that you're all speaking the same language, you're all evaluating against the same KPIs, and you're also then judging, all of your channels, equally, so to speak, and you're not kind of holding, your different teams to different standards.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's a good call out. I think businesses tend to think like, oh, more data is better all the time, and not always think through like what are the repercussions of bringing all of that data in, and do we actually have like the internal structure to support it? So those are really good points. So for question number 2, what are some of the most impactful ways that brands are leveraging their data warehouse for custom marketing insights? And Omar, I'm going to pass this one back to you.
Yeah. And definitely, this is one where I might ramble. So Ashley, feel free to cut me off for going on time, but there's just like a ton of ways that customers are doing like really interesting things with our data. First one I'll speak to is, we have customers that are, computing like, as their key KPI, like that LTV to CAC ratio. So they're looking at, what's the customer lifetime value to their acquisition cost. And this is really important so that you can ensure that your marketing efforts are aligned to your most profitable customer segments and channels, right? And they can do that by taking our log level data and unifying it with customer data in their warehouse, typically coming from their CDP. So we have customers that take that log level orders and revenue, and then tie that to their CDP, where they've got just a wealth of customer attributes that they can use to build segments, customer segments that give them an understanding of like a projected LTV. And then they line that up with their acquisition cost that's consolidated in Rockerbox, and boom, now you've got, an important metric that you can optimize against, and you can ensure that, you're again targeting profitable customers. And it's also cool because, with the attribution data in Rockerbox, you're not only targeting profitable customers, but you're saying, hey, this is the proportion contribution that this channel is contributing to that LTV to CAC ratio. Another interesting one is companies that look at like contribution margin by channel. And when we're talking about contribution margin, we're saying, hey, what's the proportion of revenue or sales that's left over after covering our variable costs? So how much money do we have left to contribute to covering fixed cost? And this is just like a really important KPI for some customers that again have like a higher fixed cost structure and want to understand the incremental value driven by a channel, and again use that as like one of their their business drivers. And again, speaking to it super broadly, right? These customers take their attributed revenue in Rockerbox, they take their attributed revenue and their sales by channel as part of the equation, and then building up from an order level, they will pull in the variable costs on an order basis from their, other data in their system, kind of joining on like the order IDs that we make available in our Rockerbox data, and have built up that bottoms up view of contribution margin by channel. And I think the third area that I'll deep dive is how folks kind of use warehousing to really break out and look at like views versus click-through performance in their attribution, particularly for Meta. So take like a quick step back, right? Like we actually evaluate and track Meta attribution in a few ways. We have the deterministic click-through tracking where we're saying, hey, if user clicks on an ad, drives to site, we can track that. That's easy, right? But because Meta is a walled garden, they don't allow us to see users that view an ad on site and then later convert. Right. The same holds for like, Google, YouTube, TikTok, all of these, major social platforms, Amazon's. And so what we have is a solution that models that attribution for view through and identifies users that are likely to have seen an ad. Right. But everyone's business is different. Right. And folks have different perspective on, what they view as the incremental value of views. And we have some brands that actually don't believe like a view is highly incremental, due to the nature of their business, right? They might have a thesis that says, Meta is so highly effective at targeting users that they're actually finding users that are already aware of our ad and predisposed to convert. And these users are less likely to click, but more likely to view. So while we're painting the picture of the users that have seen the number of ads in aggregate, that incremental credit that's getting attributed, they're not aligned with. And they can, by you looking at the data in log level, you can see that incremental impact of views versus clicks, and then decide how you want to kind of report that on Meta. If you want to just remove the views entirely or downweight them. We've had customers build like predictive attribution rates that like say, hey, I'm going to downweight this factor by, X%, and then we're going to run lift tests and then revisit this and like, sanity check our thinking. It can get, really complicated really fast. But there's just, trying to illustrate some of the power that you can have with warehousing. And I'll cut myself off there.
Yeah. No, I think those are three really great use cases that kind of show like the diversity of I guess like things that you can do with all of this data once you get it into a centralized location. And especially when you start partnering it with other business data, which I think is an interesting point. Jethro, I'd love to pass this over to you. And in your experience, what have you been able to do with data warehouse and having marketing insights in your data warehouse?
Pretty much everything Omar said. Pretty funny. Pretty much to a T. I was like looking at my points. I was like, can't talk about that. Can't. But yeah, I'll briefly touch upon like some things for maybe customers who have subscription-based businesses or those that have like a free trial. Right? If you're in SaaS, you might have that. You can use these predictive LTV models to say, hey, looking at people pre-journey, right? Looking at customers in the past, what did they do prior to converting? Are there any kind of statistically significant differences in key attributes of behavior, whether it's visiting a certain page or not, or a combination of channels where you kind of integrate multi-touch attribution that brings in different customer segments? That's kind of one way that I've found success is kind of using that where you have like if you have a 14 or 30-day free trial, that signal to subscription, and it's just a subscription, right? You don't know if the customer is going to churn the next month or not, or in 3 months or whatever, your business looks at to optimize towards. That's one area that I found success. Another area is kind of marrying this with segmentation data you might have to address different areas of churn, again, in more of a subscription-based business. Those are some of the key areas that I found. Areas that I want to test, we've tested a little bit into, so I can't speak a lot to, is more personalized marketing experiences as well as lifecycle and integrating in it. So I think there's a dearth of information available, especially if you have this clickstream data. And of course, the resources to kind of have dedicated marketing experiences. So if you are in, for instance, a SaaS company that has multiple features and you have a prospect and you're tracking all this data and you say, oh, well, they're really focusing in on feature X or Y. Our life cycle, should we incorporate some sort of life cycle or retargeting to kind of hone in on that specific feature and the value propositions instead of a generic marketing cycle like I see a lot of brands do. So there's definitely a power of data, and that's how you can, low hanging fruits of utilizing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I don't think it would have been a disservice to jump back through some of those same points again also. So it's always validating, I think, when we, like on the Rockerbox side, think like, okay, these are some of the most common use cases. And then to have someone who's on the brand side say, yes, that's exactly what I've used it for. And so that's always a good thing. Question number 3, what are some of the best practices for integrating marketing data with other data sets to drive more informed decision-making? You both have kind of touched on this a little bit, but Jethro, do you want to push a little bit deeper?
Yeah. So again, this depends on like what stage of a company you're at. So if you're at a company that's, would say, truly data driven, meaning that you have no data silos, that you're communicating actionable insights across the organization and across teams to kind of have a uniform vision and strategy, that's one area. If you're kind of still in this silo area, you really have to find, again, that is the value. You have to show the stakeholders the value in whether it's that marketing data. So what I say is, like, at the beginning, if you're in a stage where you don't have any centralized analytics, have centralized reporting around all your KPIs and data tools around them, so that key stakeholders around those key areas can essentially start to filter or look at cohorted data by marketing channel or these combinations of marketing channels that you're using. If you've kind of advanced from that stage, or you've met that stage and you're still in silos, I would start to then kind of, what I found success is reaching across the aisle and showing that person who might not be in marketing or vice versa why that data is important. And I've found myself success, whether it's like a product manager, and kind of educating them, whether it's a dashboard or a tool, to say, hey, you're assigned to this feature and you want to optimize it towards it. What if I told you that I can kind of tell you certain customer segments that come in, or people that click certain types of copy, that they're using your feature more than the general audience? You probably want to optimize towards that. And so when I remember when seeing this specific product manager, kind of, but almost like a light bulb kind of turn on in his head, and saying like, oh, I need to use this now. Like, I need to understand, well, what's driving brand search traffic, right? What's driving these customers that are using my feature? That's kind of how you start to break down the silos, in my opinion.
Yeah, Omar, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think, Jethro, you covered it pretty well, but I'd just add on, I think things that we've seen really successful in some successful implementations are companies that have just like a really strong collaboration between like analytics and the rest of the stakeholder teams, right? And that kind of covers, I think, like one, not just through like the stand up and the creation of like, whether they're like, dashboards or tools or like, new reporting, but it's really like, understanding like the core like need that the stakeholder has. But then understanding like the workflow that it's going to integrate with, right? Because like you can just like spin up a dashboard and it's like always on, but if it's not like delivering like timely information and is like, and the stakeholder doesn't have like fluency of the data that they're consuming, like it's just not going to be actionable. And then the other piece, I think, is that like continual communication over time, right? Like we see, brands that might stop running a particular channel, start testing in a new channel, ramp up, ramp down, right? Like your analytics teams have to have like a real clear understanding of sort of where your spend is going to shift, where it's going to trend, because they're going to need to be really locked into that data to make sure that it is not like anomalous, and that it's like, matching their general expectation of what they're going to see. Right? They should know, oh, spend's dropping off a cliff. Is there an issue with my Rockerbox integration, or like, is this just, the trend of our business? Right? So like that bidirectional and like continual communication, I think, is really important, so that, this data gets integrated in a way that's not just like useful in the onset, but is also like, continues to be useful over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're both right. I mean, there's tons of value in making sure that all of that data is being kind of like pieced into the right systems and with the right people and the right teams. So on to question number 4. And as a reminder, if you guys have any questions in the audience, drop them in the chat and we will answer those as they come. But this next question, Omar, is how are brands successfully building automated dashboards and reporting workflows to make marketing insights more accessible across teams? So kind of piggybacking on the question we just asked, like, what are they building? How are they building it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely curious to get Jethro's take on this as definitely more the expert than I am. But like, I think like, you know, one big aspect of it is like you have a warehouse, right? But that like alone, that's just the data, right? Like you need other tooling in place to take the data and really put it in front of your stakeholders so that they can consume it and, you know, it's accessible to them, not in this like technical like database warehouse environment, right? So like, you know, I'm saying, you know, things that we all know, but it's like, you know, figure out like what business intelligence tooling do you need, and making sure that that's tailored to like, you know, delivering the insights to your stakeholders in the way that they need it. But I think like, you know, also integrating with like data observability tools is something that's like really beneficial as well. So that, you know, as you set up these like reporting flows, you are having sort of like an always on like monitoring to help you understand when, you know, there are data quality or data reliability issues. Or you're seeing like anomalous behavior in some way, or you're seeing like, you know, it could be that, you know, you're seeing like a spike in CPA and it's actually not a data processing issue, but just like there was, you know, the changing business dynamics, changing business landscapes. And, you know, but these are things that like, as, you know, an analytics organization, like you want to have a handle on before you build these like automated workflows and just have it like, you know, running. You know, nothing too revolutionary there. And I think the other piece that I'll speak to that's a little bit more Rockerbox specific is just making sure that you have real like data fluency between, you know, your data providers and your data consumers. Specifically talking about like, you know, how do I interpret the data? So like, I'm going to just give a simple example because I think that's like the best way. You know, Rockerbox is aggregating data across all these different channels and platforms. Some data comes in like live, right? Like we're tracking, you know, clicks to site via Pixel. That data is available like the next morning, you know. But there are integrations like, you know, linear TV that we get post log files delivered, you know, batch files delivered on like, let's say, a weekly cadence. And, you know, your stakeholders need to have an understanding like channel by channel, like when is data expected to appear in my reporting. And then not only that, like it could be a channel that has like a longer attribution window. So you might say, hey, it's not too worthwhile to start looking at, you know, performance, you know, 2 days after we've launched this, right? Like that data fluency and that data, I think that data context is really important so that, you know, your data team's not getting flooded with questions and issues about like, hey, why is my data not looking in the way that I expect? And there are like perceived data issues that are actually not issues at all. And it's just, you know, reflective of the life cycle of your data. Yeah, so that like fluency, I think, is just a huge piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Jethro, I think you'll be able to walk us a little bit even deeper than that into kind of what you've done on the brand side too. So
Yeah, of course. And thanks, Omar, for all the background there. I think he touched on a couple of great points. Of course, it first starts with modeling the data, making sure that you have the right infrastructures and framework in place to make sure that this, you know, how you're marrying your data is expected, of course, that you don't run into any data latency issues and that your data team's kind of on top of anything that could be anomalous, right? Because when we look at anomalous data, it could be, you know, hey, we just didn't get that batch of data in yet, or there's something we need to look into, right? And so before we throw off any fire alarms, let's make sure that we're, you know, correct in our assessment of what we need to do to dig in. And so this is a great question because it kind of goes into probably what I would say controversial take, but probably one of the more controversial things to say here is that in the next couple of years, I think this conversation that we're having about how dashboards were used and have been built is obsolete. Maybe we were talking about it right before we jumped onto this webinar, but really like the common pitfalls. And I think at every single data practitioner, if they're on this webinar, if you listen to it later, you've had that experience where you have the stakeholder, company, your whole department coming in saying, hey, we need this huge dashboard with all these metrics built and we need it yesterday. Do all the hard work, you know, scope it out, you make sure you deliver, whether you deliver it all or in kind of pieces, depending on how you do it. Come to know, you will look 2 weeks later at your usage charts and say, wow, that dashboard wasn't used yet. So it is something where, again, we find what is the actual importance, or are we just looking at data to just look at data? And that I've experienced that quite sometimes, quite a bit in my career. So it's like, why are we looking into what we're doing? And that's where, you know, the future will kind of come into place. Some of the things that I've actually tested with a vendor, and there are tons of them out there, where you essentially have people prompt in, whether it's Slack or in an application, a question that you have, and you kind of surface some of your transformed data to this tool. to create insights for you, or to just create kind of a view. Because I think what a lot of BI tools, there are some that are kind of bucking the trend. They suffer from the fact that dashboards are very static, like you said. They take some time to build, and from a stakeholder's perspective, you kind of come into one or two camps of why you're looking at a dashboard. You might have some sort of new promotion or some sort of marketing initiative that you need to track performance against, and that's why you're there, right? Or some new feature launch. Well, after a few weeks, you're probably never going to have to use that again. So like that actual building strategy is where you start to try to build tools that are, you can almost have a framework in place where you can replicate that tool just for a different marketing campaign. And then you have what I almost call is like looking at the news, right? You wake up, you look at a dashboard with all your KPIs. The reason you're looking for it is like to say, do I need to look into something? So I think in the near future, you will have these AI agents or these tools that will essentially take the data and kind of highlight what's important and what's not for you to kind of kickstart your day. So I was working on kind of related projects like that and can speak more towards them, but it's probably outside of the scope of this call. So it's if anybody's interested, just let me know. But that's kind of what I've seen happen. And some of the stuff that I was working with, where you essentially had like an email going out to a marketing team on a Monday morning saying, on the top of the funnel, here's what traffic looks like. Are there anything that you need to kind of look into, anything we need to alert the teams on? Here's what conversion, middle of the funnel, churn, et cetera, et cetera. So what it allows you to do, and also data teams to do, saves from that manual mental math that you're doing by looking at a dashboard and actually kind of saying, okay, well, these are the important things. So I think in the future, it's really just the importance is modeling the data and having it accurate, and people being comfortable with it so that you can use some of these frameworks. And that also obviously works with static dashboards too. So it is the same work, but I think that's where the future is kind of coming into it.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out. And I think it all kind of comes down to identifying what both of you kind of pushed at, which is like core KPIs that the entire team is aligned in and understands, and then building the data around those. Versus like, I think what a lot of marketing teams fall into is like every KPI, we want to know just everything all the time. And then really you don't actually want to use that. Like those aren't all going to lead towards like the core question that you're trying to answer. And so I think that was a really great call out in identifying like what's most important. What are the most important questions we need to answer? What are the core KPIs? Then how do we build the data and the reporting around that? And absolutely, like technology is changing so rapidly. I think it's gonna be amazing 12 months from now when we see what can be done with all of this data in a really quick and efficient way. But great points from both of you. All right, question number 5. What are some strategies for ensuring that data housed in a warehouse is structured and shared in a way that makes it valuable to multiple stakeholders across an organization? And this kind of piggybacks on what we were just talking about. But Jethro, what did you all do to make sure that the data was structured in a way that actually made it valuable?
Great question. I think, again, it always starts with starting simple and kind of it's almost like think of like a step function where you have as an analytics team, you should be looking at all the data and kind of surfacing it in kind of what I would say tranches, based on like where you're at. So if you're in a more mature organization and you're trying to, find value across different parts of the organization, it's kind of having that full customer journey linked up. And that's where the importance of all of this data comes from, especially on a user level. If you're like more aggregated and you want to say like, oh, what's the impact or ROI on specific marketing campaigns where you're kind of using MMM, it's a little bit of a different approach, but you can still use the data for those same reasons. It's like, what is the core question or efficiency we're trying to solve for here, when it comes to that? And how you, again, bring that is really like kind of going across stakeholders and like showing them that value and finding like the trick for an analyst is finding those points, because that is the difficulty in it, of course, is how does this all make sense? How does it all connect? And do we have the framework in place, of course, to connect it all? So those are the questions you really should be asking yourself and saying, do you have that figured out before we can even house and structure it? Now that it's in there, it is really about kind of starting at the top from the executive level and really getting executive buy-in. That's where I've seen the most impact come. So what I tell folks is, and even analysts, aspiring analysts, like if you want to find your work valuable, is you need to find your champion on that like whether it's SLT, the C levels, or like a director within an organization outside of yours. And once you kind of provide that value, the bridge to going there is a lot easier. That's the hard part, though, is that executive buy-in. But that's where I've really honestly found the most success.
Yeah, that's a great point. Omar, what would you add to that?
Yeah, no, totally agree. I just want to I can't understate enough, getting that executive, organizational buy-in. Just want to keep hammering that, because without that, especially in larger, more larger organizations, you're going to have multiple different teams, even within your marketing organization, and if they're all kind of running off with different data, different methodologies, you're all just going to be running in different directions, and you're going to have no standard of measurement that you can use to evaluate channels against one another. Maybe some the boring stuff that we haven't touched on, which I think just makes the sort of put some of the guardrails in place to just make the data usable to multiple stakeholders, be they technical or non, is just making sure that you have the right data governance rules defined, right? So it's defining your roles and responsibilities for who's owning and who's processing the data, so that you have clear owners to go back to when you have questions, or when you have hey, this reports this KPI, right? I'm not clear why it's looking in this certain way, and now who to follow up on. But just as importantly, making sure that you have access controls, so that ultimately the data consumers have access to the data that they need, and not data that is sort of not essential to their role. Because we've often found that if you just give everyone the keys to the kingdom, someone's going to see something that they can't contextualize, or that is just very way in the weeds. And this generally will happen, especially if we're talking about executives, and they might really hone in on that detail and kind of derail your whatever quarterly, weekly review that you're doing, monthly, and just kind of derail whatever you're trying to accomplish at that point in time. So it's really important to understand what data is relevant for each stakeholder, and make sure that you're only surfacing them that, and you're getting them the data that they can digest, that's relevant to keeping your organization moving in the direction that it needs to move. The other piece that I want to speak to is, and I think we'll touch on this a little bit more as we talk about new tooling, is really making sure that your data is organized, structured, and documented in a way where it could be used by both technical, non-technical, and new tools AI, machine learning, based based tooling. So we're talking about, right, having data catalogs to capture all of your metadata on sources and technical data definitions. Documenting data lineage, so that where's data is coming from, how it's being transformed, and then ultimately before it's packaged and delivered off in its final report. As well as for more business users, having that business glossary of of terms, so that everyone's just very aligned on, when we say, hey, this is the KPI, this is exactly what it means, and it's crystal clear. So it's things that we probably all think of, not super glamorous, but really important. And also that data documentation is going to be really important, because those generative AI models are going to take all of that information in, and now they know everything about your data that they need to do to be able to provide insights and analysis, which, not to lead us to the next question, but yeah, that's the next question.
That is a great lead in to the next question, which is, as marketing measurement evolves, how do you see the role of data warehousing changing? And Omar, I feel like you were on a roll, so I kind of want to back to you and just have you keep rolling, and then Jethro will pass it to you.
No, exactly. Let's keep rolling. So, I mean, if you look at go to Snowflake's website and just look at what their offering is, right? It's not data warehouse, it's not storage, right? It's a full suite, of object storage, all the way through, AI, Streamlit applications. You are having the full gamut of data analysis at your hands with it's not just data warehousing anymore. And this is the case for BigQuery, Microsoft Azure, Redshift, all the major warehouse providers. So we're seeing the convergence of, or really the convergence, but the ubiquitousness of machine learning and AI just taking control of everything. And it's of course, as Jethro mentioned, it's really important to take a measured approach with this, right? We're not going to let it just run unabated. But with AI, what previously took weeks will start to take minutes as we think about like classifying our data, as we think about, automating customer segmentation, building predictive analytics, even just writing SQL queries. And, I think something to keep in mind of like right now is like, how are you structuring your data to be able to plug into this new tooling? Because AI is really powerful, but if it doesn't understand what your data structures are and what data is available, it's not going to be able to help you. It's in a meaningful way, garbage in, garbage out. So having like really well organized, clean, standardized source of truth is going to expedite that path to value. Like I said, what took weeks is going to take, minutes. I was just chatting with our CTO about this, but like, 12 months ago, there were startups that were looking at, just converting natural language to SQL. And this capability has essentially been commoditized now. 12 months from now, it's going to be, beyond what I can even think about. And, it's just really important to have your warehouse laid out in a way and documented in a way where these models will understand everything we need to know about your data. So it's as close to plug and play as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jethro, what do you want to add on top of that?
I was just gonna say Omar's on a roll. All of what you said again, I'm gonna regurgitate it because it's one of the ways to get our point across. Understanding and integrating your tech stacks, like you said, I remember back 10 or 12 years ago when I first was exposed to Snowflake. It was a true data warehouse. And you had a competitor, which was Databricks, which was more on the data science end. And so the company I was at we weren't there yet. And so that's why we had Snowflake. Come 10 years now, there's almost feature parity where, in those 10 years, Databricks has really brought on their warehousing and vice versa. Snowflake's really gotten into AI, lots of really great things. And so obviously picking your tech stack, you have Azure. And as they start to be integrated with these language models, whether you're on Amazon with Bedrock or Claude, whichever, obviously GPT with Microsoft, or they're owning them. It really just depends on where you're at. But at the core of it, and I think that's what the problem, even if we're going to state it, that tons of companies will make, is not having proper governance, not having proper data cleaning techniques or even structure. So it just becomes a problem of garbage in, garbage out, right? You can help and use AI to kind of clean some of this data, but it's not really getting at the core problem, right? And so if you have disorganized data, it doesn't matter what you have, you're going to have that same problem. So focusing on building that right infrastructure and lineage in place with proper documentation of your KPIs is really like kind of the way to go. And in terms of like future states of anything else, I think, and this is more on the marketing end, what is changes in privacy and third-party cookies doing? How is that having an impact on how you're modeling, right? Are we going to go into a world in a couple of years from now where, MTA is a little bit more obsolete and MMM is kind of is what's in flavor now because of data privacy, or vice versa? I don't really know. It's kind of hard to tell, but having at least those thoughts in mind and that strategy to kind of take into what's happening every day in the world and kind of adjusting your strategy with that is what I would give it advice.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it kind of all speaks to this like overarching need to make sure that not only, I know at the beginning of the conversation, we kind of said like, okay, there's lots of data, you can have too much, but I do think that there's something to be said about leveraging multiple methodologies. And that gets us into a different topic altogether, but like making sure that we're grabbing data from kind of different angles so that we can continue to answer the questions that are business critical for our businesses, even as some of these other things change, and figuring out how do we unify that data? How do we get to this like unified KPI set that we're actually like making decisions off of as businesses? And then what role does data warehouse play in that? And I think that's kind of where this all comes full circle. So, yeah, I really appreciate you both joining. If we have any questions, we'll give it a couple minutes if you guys want to drop them in the chat. And if not, this recording will be sent out to everyone who registered. If you missed us today and you have questions that you'd like answered by the panel, feel free to reach out to marketing@rockerbox.com, and we will get those questions over to the panelists and have them reach out to you. But I really appreciate Omar, Jethro, you both joining us today and having this conversation. I think it's really important and something that can be a little bit more technical. And I think, Omar, you said maybe like boring, not data warehousing, but like some of the specifics when we get into like the weeds. But it's really important, right? And these are questions that data analysts and marketers are coming up against every day. So I think it's a great conversation to have. So I appreciate you both joining us today.
Of course.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.